Good evening, everybody out in Zoom land and here at Pennypack Baptist Church. I am Jack McCarthy, the president of the Friends of Northeast Philadelphia History. And this group is, I know we have some new faces here tonight, so I will explain, as I do every month for the last 15 years or so. We are the Northeast Philadelphia History Network, which is a group of people that gets together once a month to hear presentations and network and socialize around Northeast Philadelphia history. We are a informal group. The way that you connect with us is through our email or through our Facebook page. The Facebook page is the Northeast Philadelphia History Network, and the email to get on our email list is nephillyhistory@gmail.com. So either of those two ways, those are the ways that we keep in touch with everybody, and if you sign up for those, then you will get notices of our events. We meet here the first Wednesday evening of every month, except July and August. And we have a really fascinating program tonight, but before we get to that, announcements about our upcoming programs. So on March 1st, Wednesday night, we are going to have a very special presentation that I think will be of great interest to many of you. It's going to be on Joseph Augustus Zarelli, formerly known as the Boy in the Box. We're going to have Bill Fleischer, who's the Commissioner Emeritus of the VDOC Society. This is the group that spent half a century or more tracking down and finally identifying the boy in the box. So we're going to have the guy that was intimately involved in that present that fascinating story. So that's next month. And then the first Wednesday of April, Harry Garforth, who presented back in the fall on the Frankfurt L and its predecessors. He did part 1, so we're going to have part 2 in April. And then the first Wednesday in May, Patty McCarthy, my wife, will be doing a presentation on the Marlton Inn, which was this really fancy, high-end entertainment mecca in Tarsdale on the Delaware River around the turn of the 20th century, the early 20th century. It was like a magnet for all the rich and famous of Philadelphia. Fascinating story. The building is still there. So that is in May. In June, we usually have a site visit to a historic site. So we haven't lined that up yet, but we do have our next few months lined up, which is not always the case. Sometimes we're throwing them together at last minute, but I would like to mention that Joseph Minardi, who spoke in January, and then we had some technical problems, and he also ran out of books to sign and sell. So he's here tonight with more books to sign and sell from his presentation from last month. And that was Philadelphia. The book is Philadelphia City of Neighborhoods, 1890 to 1910. And I will say that because of the technical difficulties we had, he did a beautiful video recorded with the images all nicely edited with musical background and everything. And that's on we have a YouTube channel, the Northeast Philadelphia History Network. And if you go on that, you can find his presentation from last month, beautifully presented. So I think that's kind of it for announcements. So for tonight, this is the beginning of Black History Month, and every February we try to have a program on African American history in the Northeast. And it so happens that a really cool project is starting in the early stages on the Byberry African American burial ground up in Byberry, kind of on the border of the Benjamin Rush State Park. This, as you will hear tonight, this cemetery was established in 1780, so it's over 240 some years old now, and then fell into disrepair. There are efforts to honor it, restore it, preserve it, and make it available and recognized by the community. So we have actually 3 groups that have come together tonight to help present on this project. We have the Preservation Alliance of Greater Philadelphia and the Society for the Preservation of Philadelphia African American Assets. And both of these groups have joined together on a grant-funded project to develop a community engagement initiative around the cemetery to get the community's input on how it should be preserved and how it should be recognized. So tonight, we're going to have Hannah Wallace, who is the consultant to the Society for SPA, the Society for the Preservation of Philadelphia African American Assets, and consultant to the Philadelphia, or the Preservation Alliance of Greater Philadelphia. She's managing the project. So she's going to present on the cemetery and try to solicit community input and feedback on the project. We're going to have Patrick Grossi from the Preservation Alliance is going to give a little background, and then Deborah Gary from the Society for the Preservation of Philadelphia African American Assets is going to present on her organization and what it's doing. So there'll be a couple of brief presentations and then the main presentation by Hannah. But prior to all that, Fred Moore is going to give it. I know it's a pretty, it's a multi-course menu tonight. Fred Moore is going to give a brief overview of Black cemeteries in Northeast Philadelphia, just to sort of set the context and give you, some of the broader picture, and then we will dive into the specific presentations on the cemetery. Okay, so without further ado, Fred Moore, take it away.
Thank you, Jack. Joe Mankiewicz just stepped in the room. I was going to give him a call, but he came without me doing that. Thank you, Joe. Thanks for coming.
Oh, thanks for helping with the nomination.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on here. So these are the 7, they aren't all recognized Black cemeteries in Northeast Philadelphia, but the 7 that we have been able to identify. 3 of them are not really identifiable, but they are mentioned by Joseph Martindale in his history of Moreland and Byberry townships. So we'll start at in Frankfurt. They're numbered there from 1 down to 7 from the top of the map from Byberry, but we're actually going to start with the two locations in Frankfurt that are about 4 blocks from one another. I'm going to move this here. Okay. The Campbell AME Church. Campbell AME Church was, they were formed in the 18th century, late 18th century. They weren't called Campbell AME Church. It was a Black church, basically an African church. But when the AME Church was, what? Okay. When the AME Church was formed, the African Methodist Church in Philly in the late 1800s, the 1700s, 1780 or so, 1770s. Frankfurt was already had a fairly substantial Black community. And though they were not the AME Church, they had no church there, but they were meeting in people's houses. They were recognized, and the Philadelphia Church was called Bethel Church. The Frankfurt Church was called Second Bethel. So there was a close association with Frankfurt and the Philadelphia Church. In 1812, Frankfurt, the community there, the Black community, purchased a lot in Frankfurt on Meadow Street, not on Meadow Street, on Kinsey Street. It was Oxford Street then. And they, with plans to build a church. There was no actual mention of a graveyard in the deed. But this group purchased this lot. There's some lots for sale. Then built a building on there finally in 1836. But by that time, they were full members of the AME Church. They had purchased, well, not quite purchased yet, but they took a large lot next door which was probably the burial ground, had been their burial ground, but we have no proof of that. Correct, Joe? Yeah. So Joe Minkovich here has done nominations on Campbell AME. We'll be seeing the Wilmot burial ground. Well, it's not Wilmot burial ground, it's Meadow Street burial ground, a public burial ground. And also on the Byberry graveyard way up. Yeah, but you did it. So it's great to have Joe here, and he'll be able to answer some questions. So back in Frankfurt, the AME church in Frankfurt has started, Second Bethel it was called. So they purchased some land, get a church going, burying people, probably had already been burying people, but now they're burying people officially on their church land. The building that is there now is, you can see it here, that over on the left, that is Campbell AME built in 1870, that building. Up on the right is the public burial ground that came into being about the same time, 1811. This is a public burial ground. It was for any, they're not going to discriminate between race, religion, or anything. But they did separate it into black and white. The upper portion, the northern portion, the black portion, and the lower portion would be the white portion. The black portion stayed pretty much in one piece. The lower portion, eventually Wilmot School this is on Wilmot Street. So on Meadow. So on Meadow Street, well, not sure how Wilmot gets it there, but the church, the Wilmot School is built there on half of that graveyard. So half of the white graveyard becomes a school property, but the black part stays a cemetery and is seen on, let's see here. Here it is, you see a cemetery here. This is a 1929 map, cemetery colored. That is the black cemetery. Down on the right, on the left, is the Bethel AME. So that's what's going on in Frankfurt in the early and mid 19th century and late 18th. Okay, now this is our map showing the 7 again. We're going to move on up into the middle part, which is in Holmesburg, and that is Bethany AME. Bethany AME also starts about the same time. These churches don't have their names yet. They don't really get these names, Bethany AME, Campbell AME, until the mid to late 19th century. They were known, you had the Frankfurt AME, this was the Holmesburg AME, or the Holmesburg Methodist Episcopal burial ground. So in 1810, half an acre of land was given by deed for the sole purpose of a black church and or burial ground. The ones in Frankfurt had not been given that way. They weren't given. They were bought by the people who, that one, the Bethany AME, was bought by the people that were members of the church. This was given, this half acre, to the black community as a trust. And when they finally got their act together, they would own the property. In 1817, 7 years later, they got their act together to the point where the trust was dissolved and transferred over to the black community there. This is on Ashton Road. That area is now called Holmes Circle. It has been called Harrisville, Harrisburg. It's called Guinea Hill. It's had a few different names, Ashtonville, but right now, in today's time, it's called Home Circle because Home Avenue went through, and there's a circle there connecting Welsh Road with Ashton. So the church slowly got going, and it wasn't quite as large. The community wasn't as large as Frankfurt, but they kept it going, and we're able to see who was buried there, but there's no stones or very few stones there. There are still some stones. In 1947, the Ashton Road was enlarged, widened to accommodate traffic going to the airport, to the Northeast Philly airport that had just opened. When they widened the road, they widened it pretty much on the church side, on the west side, and took about 20 feet of their graveyard. In the process, they lost a lot of graves. The graves were disinterred and moved into a hole. The bodies, the remnants, were moved into a hole by the church. And the church was moved back. The building was moved back. That building, at that time, well, the building was built in 1836. Let me move ahead a little bit here so you can see. This is a picture of today. The road was widened. The cemetery was severely damaged. They still haven't, well, it just hasn't been able to, they haven't corrected it. They don't know really where the bodies are exactly. Their records are lost. The church is still active. Bethany AME is still an active church with a small congregation. But they really don't know, their records are just almost non-existent. You can see death certificates indicating that there were burials there in that graveyard going back to the mid-1800s and on up to basically the mid-1900s or 1980. It isn't occasionally used now, but they need a lot needs to be done. They need a lot of help to figure out who was buried there and set some kind of a monument up to honor their dead. Okay, that's it. Now we're moving up to the Byberry section, to Moreland and Byberry. These four graves up, the four cemeteries up there were four burial grounds. Only one of them has really been completely identified and recognized, and that is the Byberry Cemetery, which I'll let Hannah cover. But we'll look briefly at the other three. And the first one is on Red Lion Road. Red Lion Road is the boundary between Byberry and Moreland Township. So this is just over onto Moreland Township. It is, okay, here are the four graves, the four sites up there. Tillier's Farm, that's the one on Red Lion Road. Walmsley's land is up a little further into Byberry. Hilborn's Farm, we'll be looking at that, and then Byberry Preservation Alliance will be covering. So this is Tillier's Farm, and what Joseph Martindale had to say was a burying place for slaves on William Tillier's farm. The lane leading to the dwelling house went opposite the school. You can see the school there on this 1895 map. That's the same location of the school back in, certainly 1800, probably much earlier, must have been there. Please meet yourself, Coffer. 1895 map shows it there on Red Lion Road. And the Martindale's book indicates that it went across the road, across Red Lion, 200 feet, and then hit a lane, took a right turn. It's kind of can be seen today where at the back of this recreation center. There's no stones there or anything. It was these burial grounds were, the people were not, they weren't well treated. They weren't well treated when they were alive, and they certainly weren't well treated when they were dead. The land would be used eventually again for farming. They dig it up, mow it, plow it, and didn't really recognize any slaves that were there. They hadn't been recognized in life, so they certainly weren't recognized in death. Yes. Well, it looks like it is vacant, but I don't know exactly where the cemetery was, where the graveyard was. You could do something. You could go out there and see if you could find any graves, but like I say, it's been plowed over so many times. Okay, but yeah, we just need a few $100,000. We'll take care of that. Well, at least it'll be spent. I don't know if you'll find any graves. It's no. Yeah. Well, I got to get hand up here. It's halfway, but it's between Bustleton and Varee on Red Lion Road, about halfway. That's wonderful. That's fairly identifiable by these directions that Martindale gave us. Next, we'll cover the last two here. Walmsley's land, as he says, 40 or 50 had been interred in a kind of cemetery for them, owned by Charles Walmsley. It was located in a field fronting the Mansion House, not far from Watson's Line. The property is now, in 1901, owned by Elijah Osmond. If you look on the map on the 1895 map, in the left, you'll see Osmond down there. That's the land. That's where it was. You'll see a house there or indications of a building. If you go to the front of that house and near the Watson's Line is basically Woodhaven Road. That is the approximation of a burial ground. Then, since then, it has been, dormitories have been built there. It was probably plowed for many, many years before that. Again, the land has really been messed with. So I don't think you're going to find any bodies there, but who knows? But I think we can say that area had been, according to Martindale, a black cemetery, a black graveyard of slaves.
A lot of times we're not going to find a cemetery that's actually really deep. When we go to a lot of these,
Yeah.
it really wasn't considered a designated cemetery.
Not at all.
A place for disposal of slaves.
Yeah, they didn't recognize them much at the time.
Yeah. Can everybody hold their comments and questions?
Okay.
Q&A?
Can't hear, yes. Well, we'll have a question and answer afterwards, so we can repeat the question. Sorry about that. So, the Walmsley land, probably there, somewhere close by. Okay. And the final one is at the corner of Byberry and Academy Road. This one, he strictly states that they have no real idea where it is, except that it was on that farm somewhere. That farm happens to be very close and actually adjacent to the land that Robert Purvis purchased in 1842. So it's conceivable that there was a slave burial ground, very close to Purvis's farm. And Purvis was certainly known for helping escaping slaves. The other, you might notice there, the P is for Purvis, the B is for Byberry. It's Byberry Meeting House. So we get an idea of how these all run together. And I think that's it. It is. We're going to get a hand up here.
Thank you, Fred. So we now have a sort of an overview of black cemeteries in the Northeast. So just something I was said earlier, because we are now hybrid, Zoom and in person, please hold your comments and questions until the end so that we can repeat them, because there's 50 some people out in Zoom land that can't hear when those questions are being asked. Something else I also want to make note of is there's a sign-in sheet going around. So please, everybody sign it and put your email on it. And then people out in Zoom land, if you would, in the chat box, put your email address, because Preservation Alliance and the Society for the Preservation of Philadelphia African-American Assets want to have everybody's contact information, because this is going to be an ongoing community engagement project, and they want to be able to interact with everybody. So if everybody here and out in virtual land can send us your email address, that would be helpful. And also, I want to mention that, as always, we have refreshments, snacks and sweets and all after the meeting. So those here in person, please stay around for that. Okay, so now on to our featured speakers. Very briefly, we're going to have Patrick Grossi from the Preservation Alliance speak. So why don't you come up and give us a little background?
Could you forward the slide?
I'm sorry?
I'll just forward the slide up.
Oh, yeah. That one?
1 minute.
Yeah, okay, all right. And then you can introduce, yeah.
Actually, one forward. Yes, that one.
Good. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Northeast Philadelphia History Network, for having us here tonight. My name is Patrick Grossi. I'm with the Preservation Alliance for Greater Philadelphia. I'll be very brief. I'm really just here to sort of explain how we got to this point, why the Preservation Alliance is involved. So we came across a admittedly modest grant opportunity with the National Trust for Historic Preservation. It's something called the Henry Jordan Fund. It's limited to the Mid-Atlantic region in our states. And when we saw it, we thought it might be a good opportunity to partner with the newly formed Society to Preserve Philadelphia African American Assets, SPA, in particular because at that time, SPA was not yet a formal 501c3 nonprofit. The Alliance is. They weren't in a position to accept those funds, but we were. So we thought it might be a good opportunity to pursue that. So we reached out to Deborah and Jackie, who ostensibly lead SPA, considered a few different ideas. We had some ideas, they had some ideas, but the one that they were particularly interested in, and Deborah could talk more about why, was the Byberry burial ground. And at least beginning to explore a way to more formally recognize, interpret, and make accessible this historic space. I really knew little about the burial. My only exposure to it was Joe's previous effort to nominate it, which he was successful in doing and getting it listed on the Philadelphia Register. But it still remained this sort of underutilized, underrecognized patch of ground in the back of an office building that happens to be leased by the National Archives. So long story short, we got the grant, which is great. It's not a lot of money, but it gives us a little bit of momentum to pursue this, and allows us to do things like bring on Hannah to really sort of dedicate more devoted time to it over the course of the next year. And I'd like to say I'll be around to see the fruits of it, but I'm actually on my way out of the Preservation Alliance. My colleague Jennifer Robinson is going to be assuming responsibility for this, at least on the Alliance's part. So I'm happy to be here. And with that, I will hand things over to Deborah. So Deborah is, I don't know what you want to be called, Deborah, president, leader, executive officer of SPA. And just in the past, year and a half, 2 years, have sort of devoted themselves to better recognizing African-American historic assets and historic places throughout the city. A lot of work has been done on that subject over the years, but not nearly enough. And there's far more still to be done. So with that, I'll hand things over to Deborah. Thanks.
And speaking into the mic, instructions. Yes, good evening. As Patrick said, my name is Deborah Gary, and I am one of the founders of the Society to Preserve Philadelphia African American Assets. So we pretty much put everything we intend to do in the title of our organization. I do have some postcards, flyers going around with a little bit more detail. So as said, our organization is primarily an educational and advocacy organization. It's our intent to make people more aware of all the history that is directly in front of them, beside them, they pass every day. So we're, our primary focus, like I said, is education and awareness, but the preservation aspect of it is it's better to make people aware of that history if it's still there for you to direct them to, you know, make it more visible. So that's the preservation aspect of our organization, making sure that those sites that are still standing remain standing, or if those owners or tenants, whoever are in need of any assistance, we act as an advocacy organization to help them, you know, get what they need so that they can continue to preserve that historic site. So as I said, that's sort of the twofold aspect, and there's a lot of ways to do that. The postcard flyer, again, that we're passing around, I'll read it for those that are on Zoom. If you haven't been to our website, which is spppaa.org, then we again identify those historic and culturally significant assets. We're basically growing a list that was originally developed by the Preservation Alliance, I believe back in 2009. So we're growing it. It had 400 and something properties on it. We're up to 500 and something, and I probably got another 50 that I still need to add. And again, as we find out more about these sites, we'll populate them and make people aware of it. So again, if, as I mentioned earlier, if the owners need help in any way, we act as an advocacy organization. I also call us a bullhorn. So, you know, if they are being ignored, then we might help get their word out of their need. We, of course, advocate to maintain ownership. That's a broad spectrum. Right now in Philadelphia, it's not just our sites, it's all sites that are, I say, under attack by these new owners that really don't care about the Philadelphia history behind the sites, and will destroy a perfectly good site with the history along with it. So we advocate to maintain ownership or seek out culturally sensitive new owners, you know, if possible. It's like put the word out underground that, you know, maybe this property is looking to be sold, you know, but you might care about it. And again, definitely those properties, which is not all these properties. So those properties that really are eligible for designation, be it city, state, or national, you know, is encourage that, encourage those nominations for those properties so that they get the proper recognition. So again, this cemetery showed up on our radar basically because of a Black History Month presentation that was done by one of probably, she's not here tonight. I don't know. I don't think she's here tonight, but one of the residents that was a history advocate that did a story with the CBS 3 news crew last February. So that's how I found out about it, and then just took it from there. So, and a lot of the things that we might end up getting involved with, we may just happen to find out by chance. So this is again going to be a long-term project, and it may not end up being something just that SPA works, because again, our intention is to really support owners. And as you'll hear later, the behind the problem here with the Byberry Cemetery of ownership. So I'll now turn it over from there to Hannah Wallace, who is the independent consultant working with us to lead this effort.
All right. Thank you, Deborah, and thank you everyone for having me. I'm going to get the slides back to where they are supposed to be. Give me one moment. Here we are. Wonderful. So my name is Hannah Wallace. It's a pleasure to be here and happy Black History Month to everybody. I'm gonna put this here. Okay, now I'm settled. So as I get started, I want to open firstly with land acknowledgement, which I like doing for any event happening here in Philadelphia. So the land upon which we gather is part of the traditional territory of the Lenni Lenape, called Lenapehoking. The Lenape people lived in harmony with one another upon this territory for thousands of years. During the colonial era and early federal period, many were removed west and north, but some also remain among the continuing historical tribal communities of the region. The Nanticoke Lenni Lenape tribal nation, the Ramapo Lenape nation, and the Powhatan Lenape nation, as well as the Nanticoke of Millsboro, Delaware, and the Lenape of Cheswall, Delaware. We acknowledge the Lenni Lenape as the original people of this land and their continuing relationship with their territory. In our acknowledgement of the continued presence of Lenape people in their homeland, we affirm the aspiration of the great Lenape chief Tamanend that there be harmony between the indigenous people of this land and the descendants of the immigrants to this land, as long as the rivers and creeks flow and the sun, moon, and stars shine. So with that, I will talk about Byberry. So I have the good fortune of working with SPA and the PAGP, the Preservation Alliance for Greater Philadelphia, to facilitate dialogues, gather public opinion, communicate with stakeholders, and develop the interpretive plan for the future of the Byberry Township African American Burial Ground, which you all have heard is overgrown and unidentified in Byberry. So to look into the origins and current standing, actually before that, I would not even be able to do this research if it weren't for the voracious curiosity of researchers like Joseph Mankiewicz, Helen File, who is no longer with us, but was the trustee president of Byberry Meeting, as well as Kathleen Butler. So, oh good. If folks can't see what's on the slides, I'll read them out and give some context. So the original name of the Byberry Township African American Burial Ground was the Byberry Place, the burying place for all free Negroes or people of color within Byberry. And just to note, although it does say free Negroes, this site was also the place for formerly enslaved Black people as well. So not folks that live their entire lives free. So it was founded in 1780 by the Byberry Quaker Meeting. And at this time, Quakers were slowly cutting off anyone that did have enslaved Africans. In 1780, there were only 3 enslaved people recognized in Byberry. And unbeknownst to the Quaker Meeting House, while they kept up the land for 200 years, when they sold the land in 1980, the deed was lost. So that really has put a wrench in a lot of the work that we are now trying to catch up on today. So the deed was lost. Who was lost by? I'm not here to really worry about that. The fact is that it is lost, and there's really no finger pointing to be done there. So I'm going to be working with Byberry Meeting to see which paths forward we can take. And if anyone has any questions, we can talk about that later for paths forward to potentially find the deed. And if we don't find the deed, what else can be done? So in 2013, Joseph Mankiewicz put in a nomination to have Byberry Burial Ground recognized in the Philadelphia Register of Historic Places. It was accepted 2 years later in 2015. And we only know of one burial of Jim Walton. Jim Walton was formerly enslaved by Daniel Walton, who was a member of Byberry Quaker Meeting. That is all we know, is that he is buried there. He's known to be the first person buried there. And of course, we do not know how many people are there, but through ground penetrating radar that can be found out. That takes some funding. And that is not something that is for me to, look into within the next year, but that is, definitely in the works in the future. Yes. And if folks are interested, I do have listed here the full story from the 2022 Black History Month CBS video that can be clicked on from the slides. If you'd like access to the slides, you can get that after this, and you can see that full video. And within the next year, the goal that I have is to get some sort of temporary signage in case folks want to visit the burial ground, they can know exactly where to go, to hold a ceremony or multiple ceremonies for those that are interred there, and to clean up the space. From seeing it, there is litter, there's thorns, and it is just not a place where anyone would want to go. All right, next up, location, location, location. So from mentioning that it is not in the best of conditions, it is accessible. So Byberry African American Burial Ground is located on the far corner, really, of the Benjamin Rush State Park. There's a parking lot nearby, and there's a path that goes directly to the burial ground. It's at the crossroads of Burling Ave and Townsend Road. Excuse me. And yes, since they are with the Benjamin Rush State Park, the likelihood that some sort of recognition from the park will be in conversation in the future. For now, we are just starting up these conversations, but just kind of connecting the dots where they naturally would fall. So that is a picture of the path right there on, let's see, yeah, on the right. It would be wheelchair accessible, although it is gravel, so things to look out for. But it is accessible, which is makes a big difference having parking. Mm-hmm. All right. So there's so much history in Byberry, abolitionist history. After the burial ground was founded in 1780, years later, the Purvis family came up to Byberry after they had mobs visit their homes on multiple occasions. In 1838, Pennsylvania Hall was burned down. This was an abolitionist core in Philadelphia. So heading out to the Northeast was a way of saving their family and themselves. Oh. Yes, and Byberry Meeting was a location where many abolitionists would come to hold meetings, whether it be for women's rights or the rights of enslaved and formerly enslaved people. And the Purvis family founded Harmony Hall, now known as Byberry Hall. And this is where they had over 9,000 enslaved Africans found their freedom through this hall. That's why Robert Purvis is oftentimes referred to as the father of the Underground Railroad. And I do have something that I wanted to read that I thought connected very well to the story of Byberry. If folks have a printout, that's what's on there. It's a beautiful poem. And this was written by Sarah Louisa Fortin Purvis. So her last name is also Purvis. She married Robert Purvis's brother. So kept it in the family. This is the grave of the slave, published in the Liberator in 1831. The cold storms of winter shall chill him no more. His woes and his sorrows, his pains are all o'er. The sod of the valley now covers his form. He is safe in his last home. He feels not the storm. The poor slave is laid, all unheeded and lone, where the rich and the poor find a permanent home. Not his master can rouse him with voice of command. He knows not and hears not his cruel demand. Not a tear nor a sigh to embalm his cold tomb. No friend to lament him, no chill to bemoan. Not a stone marks the place where he peacefully lies, the earth for the pillow, his curtains the skies. Poor slave, shall we sorrow that death was thy friend, the last and the kindness that heaven could send. The grave of the weary is welcome and blessed, and death to the captive is freedom and rest. So I highlighted that poem mainly because the timing lines up that the Fortons would have been in Byberry, living there, potentially having friends that would have been laid to rest at that burial ground. So just thinking of when this poem was written and where they were located, this could have been an inspirational location for the poem. So that is a little bit about the abolitionist history. And this next slide is mainly to allow folks to imagine what could become of the Byberry Township African-American Burial Ground. So I have 4 locations here, 2 of which I've had the pleasure of visiting. There's the Stratford Slave Cemetery Panel. This is home to Robert E. Lee down in Virginia. And I was actually, that second picture, I was there that day, I took that photo. There was a ceremony held there. And that panel was placed there in 1953 by the Board of Directors. And we have the Mount Vernon Memorial, of course, home to George Washington. And that was placed in 1983. And that was designed by the architectural students of Howard University. So thinking about, where do these different memorials come from? It is a granite column there. This is for number 2. And it is, the symbolism behind it is a life unfinished. We have the Higgs Beach African-American Cemetery, which was founded in 2001. And that is a surface mural, which is used for different ceremonies, events, and the like. And lastly, I listed the Tomb of the Unknown Slave at St. Augustine Church in New Orleans. That was placed in 2004. And that is also an art installation put there by the Danny Barker Estate. So just getting a sense of different types of memorials that are possible, whether it be an art installation, a formal panel, and a national signage, different opportunities, or to mix different ones together. All right. And recognizing the value of what memorials have, I'm sure we all are in agreement of the value of memorials, but memorials lead to celebrations, they lead to commemorations, different events. There's so much that goes into the aftermath of placing a memorial there. All right. So I have a number of things lined up for anyone that is interested in learning more. I have a survey where thinking of what it is that folks could imagine to be at the Byberry Township African American Burial Ground. There's a survey that you can fill out, an article, and if you'd like access to these slides, which a lot of clickable links, so you can kind of do your own research starting from here. Please, drop your email if you haven't already in Zoomland, and write down your email and to give us access. And if you'd like to contact me directly, I have my information here, as well as for Deborah Gary. Jacqueline Wiggins is not here with us today. She's taking a class that she has. And Patrick will no longer be joining us on this project, but thank you so much for your work. So don't reach out to him using that email address. It'll soon be inactive. And it has been such a pleasure speaking to you all, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have, so we can start the Q&A. Thank you. Appreciate it. Oh, yes, I'll repeat the question for anyone in Zoom land. Yep.
Will your group be working on any of the sites that Fred showed?
So will our group be working on any of the formerly shown sites that Fred had up on the slides? Not in this grant. Of course, there will be interest that'll be generated from this project. So, never say never. But the grant cycle that we're on is focused only towards Byberry. Yeah, good question. Thank you. Yes.
So there's a big telephone pole right smack in the middle of this. And I was wondering whether, get Verizon to move it, or
It's not in this picture.
in some interpretive way that it could be some kind of a post that could be, adorned or
Absolutely.
utilized. Has there been thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah. Deborah, if you have any thoughts, oh yes, let me repeat the question. There is a telephone pole. I have it in the photo. You can see it here. It's kind of covered up by the trees, but it's the one that doesn't look like a tree. That is located right there, smack dab in the middle of the burial ground. It's only a telephone pole right now, but thinking of temporary signage, that is something that I had in mind. And Deborah, if you want to speak more on that.
Make a comment on that goal?
Yeah, we could repeat it up here. Go. Oh, yeah, well, come on.
Sure.
Okay, yeah, however. I appreciate how informal these meetings
Yes,
are.
definitely.
Yeah.
You have that.
I got vertigo. I might fall.
Then you can all laugh. But anyway, I don't have a very good speaking voice. I'm hard of hearing, and I did the nomination for Byberry, and I was very upset about that telephone pole, Jack, because it was a right of way granted. There's only so many things you can put in a nomination before you start confusing the historical commission, and I didn't want to confuse them too much about the pole. Might have been right through somebody's grave, but it might be right through somebody's grave. And it was a right of way granted to the utility company, and they put these things 20, I think they're 50 feet apart. And you think maybe knowing it was a graveyard, they would have kind of like shifted the position so it wouldn't be in the middle of a graveyard, but that pole is right in the middle of the graveyard. So anyway, there's a lot of things. I have a tendency in nominations are on way off course, so I got to stay focused, and otherwise the nomination would never get finished. And it's not finished now because you guys are working on it. Thank you very much for a little bit of time.
Yeah.
And the only other thing I'll add, just to clarify, I know Hannah mentioned that we're trying to address the deed and the ownership of this site. So, and I know that our park manager is in Zoom land, so just so that she feels that we represented the park correctly. So the burial ground is not on the parkland, is at the edge of the parkland. The only way you can access it, however, is through the park. So that's the relationship between the two. The pole, yes, I did when I was out there as well. I had mentioned that to the park managers, like, oh, what's that pole? Because that's the perfect place to put a sign. So yes, so we do know who owns the pole. But in the meantime, we were trying to verify ownership in general, just so that we have permission to do anything on the burial site. But again, as Hannah said, as part of this project, in order to get to the site, you need to still go through the park. So we are going to have to work things both with the park as to what can be done, as well as with the owner, if we get clarification of who really is the owner. Because when we started this, we thought that it had been sold to the city. So me and Jackie, who is our co-founder, we're going to try to pressure the city and work through the council person's office. I had to talk with their staff as well. So there's like so many different paths this project's going to have to take. And, we're going to pass as much of this week to Hannah, but both Preservation Alliance and the SPA, we also have a role that has to help this, at least this first phase go. But yeah, there's several paths we got to take on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you for that. I saw a question that popped up from Zoom about volunteer cleanup. Absolutely. That is part of signing up for the emails as well. You're not signing up to volunteer, but you will get the offer to volunteer. And of course, that'll be at a warmer time. So, to be determined on what the date will be for cleanup, but there will be a cleanup, and we would love, as many volunteers as we can. And just following up, yes. So, so many paths forward. If the deed can be located, that's one path is, that's kind of the slowest path, but also just getting an interpretive plan together so that once we get the green light, then we can just, kind of move right into action with what it is that, how we would like to interpret this site. Did I miss any other questions from Zoom?
Or we're putting the chats up.
Oh, wonderful. I can't click on it from here.
No, I figured it.
Okay, great. Any questions from, yes,
I'm throw this out there for what it's worth.
please.
I had a utility pole on the property that I previously owned, and it might be the utility that paid the former owner $1. And it was in my deed. I'm suggesting if you know who owns that pole, you might want to contact them because they probably had to compensate the property owner. And if they did, they had to know who the property
Who it
owner
is. Yeah,
So,
that's
for what it's
very
worth.
helpful.
For
Thank
what
you.
it's worth.
Yes, yeah, thank you. I see Deborah already writing down that note. Thank you. We have a question. Is the cemetery behind the model playing field?
No.
No, it is not, according to Deborah. Yes, no, it is not.
Near it.
It's near it, but
Right, it goes to the playing field, it's on the other side of the road.
gotcha. It's on the other side of the road. Yeah, as you can see, I don't know the geography up there that well. So thank you for everyone for jumping on that question.
And then the Friends of Poquessing.
Thank you. Yes.
They do these cleanups
Ah,
all around the Poquessing watershed.
okay,
What they do, monthly, I think, once a month.
okay.
They're very active.
That's
So,
great too. Yeah.
And this guy is saying that, so you.
Wonderful.
Friends of Poquessing.
Oh, yes.
Watershed, right?
If we can just scroll up
And I think the Professor Creek Park comes up to that.
Yeah.
too.
So I am Hans Rolandson from the Friends of Poquessing Creek. Oh. They do cleanups and they're interested in
So he's
helping.
saying-
Thank you.
he's saying
Yeah. Contact them. Wonderful.
Because
Good.
they might have a group that come out there. They usually have 5 or 10 people that organize to clean up sites along the creek watershed.
This is a good question. And they have a Facebook page. Very good. So the Friends of Poquessing Creek, I'm just responding for Zoom land. Yes, they have a Facebook page to follow up on. So here's a question from Linda Schrader. Hello, Linda. Hope you've been well. 2 questions. Could any enslaved people be buried in this burial ground? And do you think you will be able to ID individuals or place markers eventually? So for the first question, from what is recorded, they say formerly enslaved or free people. So I would say no. I know from the research, I believe that Joe Mankiewicz did, that folks that weren't enslaved, you would likely be buried on the location where you were enslaved. So that's from the research that I have. And for identifying individuals, likely not, unfortunately. No records have been found. I know that both the Byberry Friends meeting, from their records, they did not find any, and same goes for the Byberry Library Company, also did not find any. So the search has been done so far. No IDs have been made. And let's see. Oh, to place markers eventually. Yes, that is the goal. Eventually, of course, likely will not be within the next year, but that is, the ultimate goal. Good question, Linda. Hope you've been well. All right. Yes. Oh.
Has there been any other enslavements that are property? I know that butchers were
Right.
dug up.
Exactly. Yeah.
So Philadelphia doesn't have that much land at this point in time, and what is undeveloped is tech.
Yeah.
So we don't about that.
Yeah.
Have they ever found
Any other? Yeah. So the question was, have any other enslaved people been found in burial grounds or just buried in Philadelphia? My quick answer is yes. I have a a former colleague of mine, some of you might know him, his name is John Hopkins. He works with the Christchurch Preservation Trust. He says that if you dig deep enough anywhere in Philadelphia, you will come across a burial. So, you know, I know he listed off a few to me. Right now, of course, as soon as the question comes up, all possibilities are escaping me. But I do know that other burials have been found in Philadelphia. There's I want to say, is it not Mother Bethel, but there's a Bethel church that they are getting recognition. It came across my feeds recently, but for a burial ground that they have. So I'm sorry I can't give you details, but I do want to say yes. There are burials everywhere for all peoples in the city. Yeah. Okay. Question: has anyone there ever been to the Buffalo Soldiers Cemetery in Cape May, New Jersey? Has anyone been there? I have not personally. Yes, we have one person in the audience here that has. Mhm. Any thoughts on?
It's fairly moving because it was kind of not intended, not understood there, and then.
I see. So similar condition.
And veterans and posts and more scouts that are going from there. Eagle Scouts have done.
Oh. Okay, so we have one person in the audience here that says that they have been there, and that seems to be shifting and changing over time, similarly to Byberry, under-recognized and overgrown. But there seems to be more momentum going on there, so that could be a good example for where we're at. Yes.
Weirdly, Eagle Scouts tend to be people who put in time in it.
Ah, okay.
Just like this.
Hmm.
If you get hooked up with
Eagle Scouts.
they find synergy.
Okay. Recommendation to connect with Eagle Scouts. So thank you. Yes.
What about a survey to know exactly where the lines?
So yes, they're oh yes, sorry. So surveying to know exactly where the lines are, where the markers, you know, the different ends of the burial ground. I know that there was a survey that was done shortly after the deed was transferred and then lost, that says where those markers are. In my previous visit, I did not see them, but I believe that they're out there. And if they aren't, we're gonna do another visit out there so we can kind of compare what's on paper to what we see. So it is on paper. I haven't seen it yet with my own eyes in person, but I intend to. That was on my next to-do visit, was to see where those markers would be. Yes.
The one that's on Red Line Road between Buffleton and Marie, is that where the condominium is back to the condominium today?
So we had a question about the Red Line Road Cemetery. Would you like to take that? Yes.
Correct. Down west side, Red Line Road, south side.
So,
Yeah, our condominium.
yeah.
This should be at the rear of the, well, I think, on the west side.
So we had a question about a burial ground near Red Line Road. There's some condominiums that have gone up, and that is the correct location. So saying that for folks in Zoom land, probably not enough context, but
Probably
yeah.
the graveyard would be beyond the here. There's taking space behind. I think that's probably what they did.
Because they weren't allowed to build on the act.
They would, no, nobody would be smart, they don't deserve it. No, it isn't, it's efficient.
Yeah. We-
One person said, fine. You know, it's not enough, it's not.
So we have a very nice comment from Michiko Quinones. Hello, Michiko. Good to see you here. Michiko says that there are cemeteries in Pensacola and Timbuktu in New Jersey. Both have Civil War soldiers. Thank you, Michiko. Yeah, see, the more I am enjoying, the more burial grounds I can know about, kind of, the more references to have in considering the future of this one. Yes, Joe.
Do you ever consider trying to take the city of Philadelphia or some sport, somebody taking, there's no advantage to the city keeping its cemetery. They just put telephone poles through it. I mean, they shouldn't be embarrassed, but for a corporation, there's no embarrassing the city of Philadelphia.
Yeah. So Mr. Mankiewicz had just asked about potentially taking it up with the city, taking the city to Orphans Court, or how to move forward with the city to get
partition it.
To partition it, yeah.
Don't need it for anything.
Yeah, so I do have a few leads to follow up with, for potentially, because I'm trying to see all avenues, if the deed can be located, wonderful. So through a lot of your research, there was the Hess law firm that was involved in the transferring of the land. So they are still active, so reaching out to them. And Helen File, in her research, she found the first page of the deed, and that's all that we have from her files, from Helen File's files. So if if anything can be found further within her research, that would also be a potential way forward. But if the deed cannot be found, I can't really speak on what could be possible for that yet. But just that's where gaining enough recognition and putting enough people in the right place for this, that you can go to the city and say, if you're not going to do anything about this, and if this is still your land, something has to be done. So not so much an answer to your question, but it is a possibility. Yeah. We need to, okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone, for your questions. Please reach out.
Yep. So thank you so much, Hannah and Deborah and Patrick and Fred and everybody. So this is the beginning of what will be a long process, and they want community engagement every step of the way. So everybody's invited to continue to engage with this, and we'll keep you updated. So next month we have, again, the presentation from Bill Fleischer, I'm sorry, from the Commissioner Emeritus of the VDOC Society, or VDOSH Society, on Joseph Cefarelli, or the Boy in the Box. So we think that's going to be really fascinating. And then again, every first Wednesday of the month. So those here in person, please stick around for the refreshments, and there will be books to sign by Joe Minardi of his book from last month. And hopefully we'll see you next month. And thank you, everybody out in Zoom land. There were over 50 of you, and I think there's about 30 of you here tonight. So it was a nice turnout. Thanks, everybody.